Welcome csc103 class to our snowman exercise. We're going to be using Blender software, which is 3D software. It's open source, it's free, it's not online. You could download it online, but it's not like the Vectory software that we were starting out with that just didn't seem to work with what we were doing. So we're going to use Blender. You could download it at blender.org. It's free for both Mac and Windows. And once you download it, I already downloaded, so I'm going to launch it. And you might see something like this. It's at version currently 2.79b. I think there's a 2.8 coming out soon. And if you see this here, you could click off it. I'm working on a Mac right now, just so you know. And you'll see this kind of startup file when you begin. This is kind of your 3D space. A couple things I want to point out about it. It always starts off with this default cube. This is your y-axis. This is your x-axis. And this is your z-axis. And you can see down here, it kind of shows you what it is down there. There's your X, Y, and Z in case you forget, which I do sometimes, because some 3D programs treat this a little bit differently. So, and these arrows here are moving arrows, so they move them this way, and they only move in one direction, up, down, and along the Y-axis, and along the X-axis, along the Z-axis. There's tools down here for doing other things. If you want to rotate on the axis, you could click on this little arc thing, and then you could kind of rotate on the y-axis. You could rotate on the x-axis, and you could rotate around the z-axis if you want to. At any time you could hit the S key and it kind of scales proportionally. So S is for scale. There's a lot of keys in Blender where you just hit one letter. It allows you to do something. When you're finished scaling, you hit your left mouse button. And when you select something, you click with your right mouse button, which is a little bit different than some other programs where you're used to left clicking, but you would right click to select. If I wanted to delete this, I can hit the X key and just select delete, and now I have nothing on in my 3D view. Now a couple things just to point out, even though I got rid of my cube. This thing up here, I'll left click on it and I'll get out of this rotate kind of view and I'll just put it on moving. That's our light, that's our lamp that creates our light source. This thing over here is our camera. And what I'll do is, well, actually, let me go file new a second. I'll start up a new startup file. This camera here is always ready to take a picture of your site. So even though when you hit your middle scroll wheel, you hold down on your scroll wheel, you can move around like this. So your middle scroll wheel, you could always move around like this. If you hold shift with your middle scroll wheel, you could kind of pan back and forth. And then also there's these views down here, which are the orthogonal views. Top, there's our viewing from the top, seeing our X and Y. Viewing from the bottom, also seeing our X and Y. Viewing from the front, and then we can kind of see that the cube is kind of halfway through this little kind of base grid that's here. There's nothing there, it's kind of floating, but you can see it's kind of in the middle of that kind of starting point. And from the back and left and right. So all these different views that'll help you kind of move around, and you can see there's our light, there's our camera. Now we also have a view from the camera. Now you could go here to go to view and you could say camera. And that's where the camera's seeing it right now. And usually when you're done, you're going to go to render and you're going to take a picture of it. And it's going to take a picture of your cube so far or whatever you have. And that's what it's going to look like when you're done. And it goes into this little kind of rendering area where if you wanted to save this, you could go down here to image, which this is what you're going to do when you're done. So I'll review this again, but then you could save your image as a ping file. And this kind of saving interface doesn't look like your operating system, so you just got to get used to it a little bit. Now if you want to get out of here, I could cancel, and if you want to get out of this render view, you could do two things. You could either hit the escape key, or you could go down here and go back to 3D view. And then if you just kind of move around, if you just kind of hold down on your scroll wheel, then you could kind of move around. But just keep in mind that you may be moving around in different ways, you know, and you might build something right here, but your camera is going to be taking a picture of it over there. So we'll go over how to move your camera around, you know, so that you can take a nice picture of what you're doing, and that's why we'll kind of build a snowman that has kind of a face on it. So I'll even start this new one more time, and I'll reload the startup file, and I'll right click on this. I could hit delete over here, or I could just hit my X key and delete my shape. And what I'm going to do is go down to add. I'm going to go down to add, and I'm going to add a mesh UV sphere. And there it is right now. It'll kind of look like a disco ball. And if I move around here, you can see it's kind of embedded halfway through our grid that's there. So we don't really have a floor, but it is kind of embedded halfway through of that space that's kind of giving you a starting point. So that's how we're going to build our snowman with that thing to start. And what I'll do, I'll even kind of move up a little bit. Again, I'm holding on my middle mouse wheel, and I'll drag it up so it kind of sits on here. And if you weren't sure, you could go to view, and you could view from the front, and you could view from the left. That's not really going to help you that much. It's probably going to look the same. So everything's pretty much in the middle. If you viewed from the top, you'd look right down on it, look like a circle. So that's our first kind of sphere that we have here. If I hit my S key, I'll make it a little bit bigger. And if you hit your left mouse button, that okays it. If you hit your right mouse button, it goes back to the way it was. So it's a little bit bigger right now. And you can see it's like 1.5. So we went about 1.5 times when we did that originally. And now it might be underneath. So if I view from the front one more time, I might need to move it up just a little bit. Now it is a snowball, so it could be a little squash. So even if I use this key, I didn't mention this one yet, but these transformation ones, I could kind of squash it down. Now I don't want to squash it down all the way, but I could squash it down just slightly, just to kind of squash down the snowball. These you could kind of scale in either direction. So that's my first sphere that I have there. And I'll just go back to my arrows here. And I'm going to add another one. And again, remember if you just go to render at any time, you can see what it looks like through your camera. It just looks like a disco ball. If you want to, and I'll hit escape to get out of there. Now if you want to smooth that out, you could right click on it and you could just hit smooth over here on this transform panel, and that'll kind of smooth it out. Now we didn't put any material, it's just kind of a default kind of gray material. Now what we'll do next is we'll put kind of a plane down, so we have kind of a floor that this thing's sitting on, so it's not just floating in space. So we're going to go to add, and we're going to go mesh, and we're going to choose plane. And it's just going to make a flat plane, and we can only scale it in X and Y direction, so I'll use these scale tools and I'll drag it out on the X axis, and then I'll drag it out on the Y axis. And you can keep doing it more and more and stretching it out and as far as you want. It's just like a big kind of carpet that you put down there. So, and we could give these kind of different textures and colors right now, but at least that way we have something that it's kind of sitting on right now. So if we took a picture again, I'll just go to render. And there it is. It just looks like it's sitting on something gray. You can see very harsh shadow here with the light. We could adjust the light a little bit. And where our camera is, you can see our light's kind of up here. And I'll go back to 3D view. And you can see our view is a little bit different that we're looking at because we're kind of on the right side of the camera right now. So we have a grid, we have two objects. And if I look over here, this thing's called our outliner, they call it. Some of these panels are kind of hard to get used to, but that's called our outliner. I'll stretch this down a little bit. And you can see what we have in our world. We have our lamp, we have our camera, we now have a plane, and we have a sphere, and the whole thing is called the world that we're working on right now. So we're going to add a couple more spheres and kind of build a snowman. We'll probably eventually put like a little texture on it. We could even try and do that now. One thing we'll do, maybe we'll put a background in here, make it look like a sky. The way we could do that is we could go over here. This thing is our properties that we're showing here. Now if you can't see them, you could hold down on your middle scroll wheel and kind of cycle through them because there's more here that'll show, or you could even stretch this out a little bit. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, but I'm going to go to my world right now. And when I go to world, I'm going to click on paper sky, blend, and you could click real sky or not, but these are the sky colors right here. And just to try it out, I'm just going to lighten them up. And maybe I'll go kind of like reddish up to blue or something. I'll try like that. Maybe I'll do like an orangey, and I'll make it real light, almost like a sunset. And then this one, I'll make this one more of like a blue color. So it kind of looks like that. Here's the preview right here. So it kind of looks like that. Now let's check it out through our camera, see if we could even see it. First of all, I'll go to render, and we could barely see it right now. So we might have to adjust our camera a little bit to do that. But now you can see we could have a little bit of it right there. So we're not really seeing kind of the orangey part or anything like that. But anyway, now we have a little bit of background in our world that we're working on. So let me escape out of here, and I'm going to kind of go find my camera. I'll zoom out, and using my scroll wheel to kind of zoom in and zoom out. I'll go find my camera, and I'll just kind of go behind it and then zoom in and just kind of see what I'm seeing from the camera. And you can see that's where they're kind of seeing things. So you can kind of, you could stay here and kind of work things, or you could work somewhere else and then eventually bring the camera to where you are. What we had when people were working on these, if I go back to kind of our perspective view here, You know, we kind of start like this, and people were kind of working in here, and the camera was over there, and they had a snowman, and then you couldn't see the snowman. But one thing you can do is you can make the camera come to where you are. They have a view down here, and we had this issue in one of the classes where people couldn't get a good picture of their snowman after they made it. And if you go down here and you go view, and they have align view, they actually have something called align camera to view. So wherever you are, the camera will move there. So just be aware that you can do that. I'm not going to do that just yet because we'll keep building our scene a little bit. Now what I'll try to do, I'll zoom into my sphere right now. I'll try to give it a little bit of texture, and then what we'll do is we'll start duplicating this. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go over here, and the way you add a texture is you put a material on it first. So you give it a color first, and then you give it kind of a texture if you want it like a bumpy texture. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go on this thing as materials, kind of right next to the checkerboard after this kind of plain looking thing or object data here. So I'll click on here, and what you have to do is just hit new, and it'll just be white, and you could just leave it white to start. That's fine. You don't have to do anything else. And then you could go right to the next one, which is the checkerboard one, which is texture, and you're also going to hit new. And it says image or movie. We're not going to use image or movie, but they have all these kind of stock things in here, and I might use something like stucco, just to give it like a bumpy kind of feel. Now, working with these is a little confusing because there's so many different settings and you don't know what to use first. But I'll kind of lead you through this a little bit. One of the things you want to do here is where it says projection. If you go down to mapping, kind of went up here and I'm under stucco and it says plastic and what, and you could kind of experiment with some of these. But I went down here to flat, and I'll change it to sphere because that's what it's doing. And then under UV, it says coordinate UV. I want to change this to object. Just change it to object. And what should happen, you should see a little preview here, and you can click on the material. And you're seeing this, first of all, it does kind of look stucco-ish, but it's like pink and white. And that's because if you scroll down, you'll see this kind of pink color here. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of make it, maybe a darker color, just kind of a little bit of a gray color, and I'll move it to the center right now, just see what happens. And I'll go back up and take a look at it. And now that looks a little more snowish, unless we want to go completely white, see what that looks like. You know, we could put this in the middle and go completely white and see if we still have a little bit of a kind of a variation of color there. And we have a little that we have there. And one other thing we're going to do is if we scroll down, if we just click on this thing that says geometry, what that should do is it should take that variance in color and kind of make it bumpy. Just like that. Now if you're not sure, and that's what it should look like, but the only way to know for sure is if you render it. And there it is, a little bumpy, and you might think, oh, that looks like a brain. Maybe you want to take the size down, and you could do that. You could go here and take the size down a little. It should kind of preview here when you take the size down. You could use these little arrows where you could slide on these things too. Go back and forth, or you could type in a number. You could double click on here, kind of highlight and type on a number, but I'll try 0.15 and I'll render it again. It'll update and render again, and that's okay. It still looks a little deep on it, which you can adjust to. Let me take this turbulence down a little, see if that affects anything. And I'll render it again. And I don't know if that'll make it softer or not. There's different settings here that you'll kind of get used to. And one other thing too that this might do, the geometry here is it's at 1. And let me see if I put it down a little to like 0.5. See what happens. And that kind of softened, it looks like that kind of softened. So that one kind of works a little better. And if you slide back and forth, so again, it started at 1, and if I make it go up too high and I render it, it's going to get really kind of brain looking. So maybe something like, 0.3. We'll see what that looks like. And I'll render it again. And that looks okay. And I might even want to go a little smaller, like 0.1. So I might just go 0.1 from 0.5, and I'll render it one more time. And that's fine. It's kind of golf ball looking, but for our snowman or what we're trying to do here, that's okay. And I'll get it out of this. I'll go back to 3D view. Another thing I just want to double check. I'll go back to my materials, just make sure that is white. I'll crease that a little bit. It looks a little dull. Let me try it again. That's a little better. It looks a little more white right now. And what I'll do is I'll see if I could give the ground the same kind of texture so it kind of looks like snow. So I'll go back to, I'll hit escape and get out of here, and I'll click on this, And I'll do the same thing. I'll go to Material, and I'll go to New, and I'll give it the same one. I'll kind of raise it up a little bit, and then I'll go to Texture. And if you don't see anything, just scroll up. And you could go to this little, instead of hitting New, you go to this little drop down here, and I could choose the one I already have. I'm going to click on that one, and that should be the one I already have. And I'll double check. Although it's not using, it's still using that color. It's not using the same settings. Let me check something else. So I'll stay with this one, although it looks like I have to go and kind of change this here. So I'll put this back to kind of like a white color. And I'll also put on geometry. Now this should have taken the same one, although I'm not sure if it does it for a plane. And yeah, it's not taking the same things. I'm going to do flat, and I'll do object on this, and I'll see if I get some texture on my ground. And that looks okay. All right, so I have the kind of texture on my ground. It doesn't quite look like snow right now, but that's kind of where we want to go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to stack a couple spheres on here so we get kind of the snowball kind of look. So I'm going to go back to my 3D view, and I can duplicate this. I can add another one through Add, or I could just hit Duplicate, and you can see it just kind of moves right from my mouse. And I'll keep it kind of close by there, and I'll hit my left mouse button, and I'll just kind of move this. Now I gotta kind of move from the top to see where it is. You can see I'm not really close to it, and I'll kind of move around a little bit, and I'll move it up because it's kind of like embedded on the other one. I'll zoom out a little bit, and I'll hit my S key to scale it, make it a little smaller. It's a little tipsy right now, but now I'll move it over, and I'll move it up just a little bit. And I'll move around to see what it looks like, and it looks like it's pretty much on center. And it should have the same texture if I render it, if it's in the camera view, and I can see it a little bit. We'll have to adjust our camera view. And I'll escape. And now I'll duplicate it again. And there's another one. I'll keep it close by. And I'll left click. And I'll move it up. It's kind of weird to move it up in that view, but I'll move it over here, and I'll try to stack it kind of where it was. I'll look around here. You can see I'm off. If I go to the top view, this is where you may want to go to one of those orthogonal views. I'll go to the top, and I should get a better view of where I am, and I'll kind of go over top of everything. I'm going to have to scale it, and then I'll kind of just go this way, and I'll hit my S key, scale it down, and then I'll left click and move this down a little bit, and then just kind of move around and make sure I'm okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It looks like this one's a little off. I'll right click there and just move that over a little bit, and then I'll right click here and move this one up a little bit. So there's kind of my snowman body. I think I'm okay with that so far. And what I'll do next, and then we'll take a break. I'll try to do this in 2 videos. I'll just render it and see where we're at, and we probably can't see much of it. And what we're going to try to do is kind of move the camera up a little bit. There's a couple different ways to do this. So let's go back to 3D view and deal with the camera a little bit. Like if you kind of like this view that you're at here, this 3/4 view, you know, you might find yourself a nice view. I'll hold shift and kind of move it down here, and then I'll kind of move myself down. So now I can see some of the sky a little bit. And I'll move it in a nice place here. So that's a nice straight on view of my snowman, except I don't know where my camera is. My camera is somewhere else, but what I could do is this is where I could go to view, and I could go to align view and say align active camera to view. And that'll put the camera right there. Now, because the camera is kind of at a certain vantage point right now, it's getting cut off, but I can work with that a little bit. So what I could do is I could go over here to my outliner. I could click on camera, and then I want to click on the movie camera over here, and they have X and Y, and they also have focal here. So what you could do with X and Y is if you just slide back and forth, it'll kind of pan up and down, and you could slide the X and it'll go that way. And if you move this thing in a direction, if you go down, it'll kind of pan back a little bit, and that's what I kind of want. And if you wanted your camera lower, like looking up, you could always physically move your camera down. Now let's render this and just see how the light is. I don't know how the light is. And that's actually not too bad. That's a pretty good viewpoint, other than our, grid looking like a piece of cardboard and not really like snow, but that's not too bad for what we're doing starting out here. I might move up a little bit because we're going to probably put a hat on them. So I'll go back to 3D view, and I'm still viewing from the camera, so I'll just adjust my Y a little bit to go up, so I could, if I put a hat on them, I'll be able to see that. So now my camera has moved. Now I could still move around and my camera will stay in this point, but I just have to remember where my camera is. Now if I hold on my scroll wheel right now, that'll put me back into 3D view, so I could start putting things in here, and I just might want to remember that this is kind of where my camera is. And what I'll do is I'll start to put a hat on them, and I'll do that by adding a mesh. And someone mentioned using a torus, and we could do that. Now, where is my torus? I'll zoom out here, and here it's over here. So let me move this thing over kind of into place and move it up a little bit. Still not high enough. Looks kind of like a big inner tube. Now I'll get back into place, and you can see what it looks like right now. Doesn't really look like much of a hat, but we'll kind of get it into place, and then we'll hit our S key to scale it and make it a little bit smaller, and left click, and then we could use the scale thing to kind of squash it down a little bit so it looks more like a hat brim. So I think that's okay, and I'll go back to my arrows here so I'm not scaling it anymore. And that's kind of, might want to move it down a little bit on his head. There we go. And then we'll put a little, I'll zoom out here, we'll put a little cylinder on it. So I'll zoom out here, so we have half his hat. And now I'm going to add a cylinder, mesh, add, and then add, mesh. You have to kind of stay here, it jumps out really quick. And here's a cylinder, wherever that is. We have to zoom out, there's our cylinder. So I'll just kind of move it into space here, and I'll just move it along the axes, and I'll move it up kind of into place. Still not high enough, I could see. And there, it's kind of in place. It's covering up his head right now, so I'll move it above its head, and then I'll zoom in a little bit, and you can see the cylinder is gigantic. So I'll hit S and scale it down so it looks more like a hat, and I'll zoom in, hold my shift key and my scroll wheel, and move this thing down a little bit. I'll hit my S key again, and I might want to view from the top. And is that from the top? If I am viewing from the top, I'm a little off on some of my things here, so I might want to move that over. I might want to move that over. Looks like things are a little off here because they should all be kind of stacked on each other if I'm really viewing from the top. But that's okay. That's why we're checking it. And now we'll move the hat back over. And then although it looks like we're seeing a perspective view, we might want to check this view here. There we go. Now we're in straight view. It looks like we have an option of perspective or orthogonal view. And we want to be orthogonal, so we're seeing it straight. So I think I was seeing perspective and getting a little thrown off. So I think actually it probably was okay, but it doesn't hurt to check. So I'll move the head now. Let me move this thing out of the way so I could see the brim of the hat. There's the brim of the hat. And then I'll click on this thing and bring this back. Bring it down into place. So I think I have everything stacked okay right now. The hat's a little high, so I'll bring it down. And I'll move it over a little bit. And that's our snowman with a hat. So that's a good start that we have here. What we'll do is we'll put some textures on this. Next video, we'll put some textures on the hat. We'll put a cone for the nose, and we'll put some arms on them, and then we'll take a picture of it, and we'll show you how to upload it so we have an image to save. But one thing you want to do here before we stop is you want to save this, and I'm going to save as, and I'm going to call it, now I have a folder here from my CSC103 class, and we're going to save it as a blender, so I'll just call it Snowman and I'll just call it V because I'm recording a video, so I'll just call it -V for now. But I'll call and that's my Blender file. That's not my render, that's not my picture of it, but that's my Blender, so I could always open up and go back to it. So I'm going to save that right now, and then we'll take a break.